Hey everybody, welcome back to Video Game Mess. So, I got a super fun and super exciting episode for you guys today, and that's because it's one you specifically asked for in the comments of my Analogue 3D videos. We're going to be testing some N64 fan games and ROM hacks today to see exactly what's working on Analogue 3D. Because Analogue advertised 100% of the retail library playable on the hardware, and we know that 100% of the games boot up and play super good there. But what about all of the games that will run on real N64 hardware that aren't part of the retail library? That's what we're going to be checking out. And we're going to start it off with Peach's Fury, one game that does not work currently on MiSTer FPGA, down to Robert FPGA Zoom Spots just not implementing the feature in the core, because Nintendo was going after people with a very specific library as far as this is concerned, down to Portal 64. It's a lot of stuff in the background. It could work, it just doesn't. But the reality is here on Analogue 3D, if you try to load up Peach's Fury, it will 100% play, although it can be a little bit graphically glitchy here and there. It is not working as well as real hardware in my experience, because I did take a look in the background, but it is playable, it is fun, and definitely something that's going to work on Analogue 3D. I would say that's the #1 request I got for test, just to see if this one will play where it doesn't on MiSTer FPGA. Before you get too much further involved though, do me a huge favor, go down below, hit like and subscribe, and ring that notification bell. Definitely helps us out. If you feel so inclined and want to support the channel, we got a Patreon link down below as well. But honestly, Krikzz makes some incredible ROM hacks on N64 and probably knows the hardware inside and out almost as well as anybody else making FPGA cores today. Because the reality is the N64 is a complex piece of silicon, or more than one piece to be specific, and there is a lot of things it can do that developers even back in the day didn't realize. And now with new libraries, as far as how they actually run on the hardware is concerned, you can actually get better performance and better visuals out of N64 than you actually could back in the day. And that is just because developers out there try to learn more about the hardware and try to develop new modern tool sets and even find out where Nintendo made mistakes back in the day. You'll see here that's definitely not the intended way to get the star, cheesing that just a little bit, but the fun thing about a game like this is so long as you get to the star, it really doesn't matter. Now I will say though, if you are going to play this game or any other Mario game on Analogue 3D, I do not like the 8-bit Do controller and Analogue 3D code in tandem. There's just something about trying to creep around with Mario and move slow, where the 8-bit Do controller seems to have issues with that, where compared to an original N64 controller like I'm using here, everything works every single time I try to play a game, all of the control inputs are accurate and everything just seems to work. But let's do the first soundtrack sample of the video because this game has some great music. 45 seconds, but come back as I got a lot more fan games and ROM hacks to show. Super fun version of an absolutely classic Mario track, but trust me, Peach's Fury is definitely going to hold no punches when it comes to the actual platforming. But now moving over to Krikzz Mods, the Blair Witch project, we just did a video on this in October and ran it on MiSTer FPGA perfectly fine because of course it does run on real hardware as well. And the exact same result is going to be here on Analogue 3D. This was one that a lot of people wanted to see me test, so just be aware, all of these tests are on the standard mode. They are not overclocked in any way, shape, or form. That's just because not every single game is going to support overclocking the exact same way as others do, and I can't say if I'm overclocking the actual Analogue 3D and the FPGA core whether or not the game is failing because of the hardware implementation for the FPGA core in and of itself, or if it is some sort of issue with the overclocking. So this is the performance you would expect to get on a bone stock N64, the stock MiSTer FPGA core, and of course the Analogue 3D stock core, because that is what we're using here. If you haven't played the Blair Witch project before, I can't stress enough, this is just absolutely a straight up awesome game that does a lot of fun horror elements with Banjo-Kazooie, bringing in a lot of nods for other horror games back in the day. My favorite part about this ROM hack was just the fact that it wasn't light horror. Krikzz Mods went for the brass ring when it came to actually making this thing a gory, bloody affair, because we're just climbing this spiral mountain right here, but it is covered in gore, and one of the characters from the game has definitely had a very bad time. Not going to say on YouTube what he has done to himself, but you can basically tell anyway. And I love the Gene Simmons S tongue here from Gruntilda. Absolutely nightmare fuel. 10 out of 10 would not want to see this in a game, and it definitely works on Analogue 3D, even if it's one of those things that's going to make you think the haunted N64 genre is real. But let's move over to GoldenEye, because if you can't tell, I'm jumping around to different game franchises to look at some of the best ROM hacks out there, and this is The Spy Who Loved Me. This is obviously just a conversion of GoldenEye 007, but it is a game that we've tested on MiSTer FPGA, and it is a game that works on real hardware. Now, if you ran this in overclock mode, you would get more frames per second, but I did have a couple issues where it actually hitched a little bit more than in the standard core. Haven't seen that on MiSTer FPGA, but it was a very unscientific test. Just one run and I noticed a few times the game felt like it just kind of dropped a few frames, but it could be anything in the game's logic causing that because again, ROM hacks are not retail games and they can sometimes do strange things. But as far as ROM hacks for GoldenEye is concerned, The Spy Who Loved Me absolutely is straight up a hidden gem in my opinion. If you never played this one before, I can't recommend it enough, so much so that it's going to be our second soundtrack sample because the game has great music as well. I'll be right back. So if you just saw there, I was using the aiming reticle to basically go into a little bit of the sniper mode, and I will say that's never the easiest thing to do in stock GoldenEye on an N64 with an N64 controller, but I will say it feels way more imprecise when I'm actually using that 8-bit DOE controller, so take it from me, definitely just grab an original N64 controller. You're going to have such a better experience, because there's just something about how fast the analog accelerates on that 8-bit DOE controller. Probably could be fixed with some firmware, and hopefully it is, but I've calibrated the analog in their actual Windows app, and even still, it just feels a little bit twitchy to me, but 10 out of 10 as far as The Spy Who Loves Me running on Analogue 3D, it is perfectly fine. And moving over to something that nobody asked me, but I'm sure someone would eventually, and honestly I was kind of surprised that nobody did. We are playing Doshin the Giant here on the Analogue 3D, but we are playing the converted ROM to make it run on a stock N64. And basically every N64 DD game out there is going to be able to do this, but you are going to lose certain features, like if you're using a real-time clock, that's one of those things that basically gets removed from these ROM hacks. But I wanted to see if any of the DD games would boot on something like Analogue 3D, because they basically all boot on MiSTer FPGA, so it's one of those things. An N64 DD, a real piece of hardware, absolutely costs a fortune, but for the most part if you want to run it on real hardware, I would recommend a summer cart. You can get a real-time clock on something like the Everdrive X7 as well, but I only have the X5, so it isn't anything I could really test. But honestly, running N64 DD games on any console is a little bit of a party trick, even original DD hardware, and that is just down to the fact that there really isn't many games, and not many of the actual titles are actually even air quotes games in the first place. But something like Doshin the Giant definitely is something you can have some fun with, and it's one of those things, it's always fun to see if this stuff works, because like I said, on MiSTer FPGA we have full compatibility, so I figured it would be fun to test it on Analogue 3D as well, because when they said 100% of the North American, Japanese, and PAL N64 library, they never had an asterisk that said that it didn't do their DD games, and I'm not saying I expected it to, and I'm not saying that I would have judged Analogue if it didn't. I'm just saying that their statement was vague enough where you could kind of almost anticipate that someone would say, but they didn't say it didn't. That's always kind of the funny thing about these things. Anything you could imagine one person thinking, you should always cover your bases for, because I see some wild stuff in the comments. Now, is Doshin the Giant worth playing on the N64 DD with this version of the game hacked over to run on a standard N64? I think it is. I think it is fun, but you can leave me a comment down below and tell me what you think about it. But as far as DD games, I tested 2 for this video and a couple more in my spare time just playing around in my living room, and I haven't found anything that won't boot yet. But hey, honestly, what game on the N64 is going to give you such a spectacular golden hour sunset? You need Doshin the Giant to have that, and it definitely is here to make you happy. And that is always a good thing, because this game definitely has a ton of charm, a lot of fun, weird characters and models, and it is one of those things, if you've never experienced Doshin the Giant before, I recommend you check it out. Just don't expect a total hidden gem. Moving back over to the Super Mario 64 ROM hacking scene, this is Return to Yoshi's Island, a game that is absolutely amazing, even if it is just a demo, because again, this is another Krikzz game. I am playing this on Analogue 3D. I did a video on it on MiSTer FPGA. It works on real hardware, and it works absolutely flawlessly here on Analogue 3D. Even if in my initial testing video I showed where the Analogue 3D is failing a lot more hardware tests than MiSTer FPGA is, or even some software emulators, you really wouldn't notice that depending on the game you are playing. because I always say synthetic tests are super useful to gather data, but in actual gameplay and practice it can be kind of hard to actually realize where those differences would lie, and sometimes a test can fail and not actually even have any sort of impact on the gameplay whatsoever, because no game would ever use that function. But this is definitely one to check out. I can't wait for Krikzz to release more of his games, because he's definitely been previewing a lot on Twitter and on YouTube, and it looks absolutely stunning, and I can't wait to see what something like this would look like in an even more finished version. But it really goes to show the ROM hacking community has so many fun things out there for you to check out, so definitely start expanding your library when it comes to N64 games that you can play, and I will leave a list in the description to all the games I'm playing here. You'll have to go out and find them yourself, because of course I can't share those. Let's do one more soundtrack sample because I love the music here. So you have returned to Yoshi's Island 10 out of 10, even if it is just in demo status and something you can absolutely sit down and play on Analogue 3D today. Let's move over to an Ocarina of Time ROM hack, and trust me, there were dozens upon dozens I could pick, but I just decided to go over Sands of Time just because it really is a fun time. Pun very much intended. That I picked the game just for the pun, I did not, it just happened to come out of my head. But I tested a couple different ROM hacks here, and basically everything I tested worked perfectly fine, but I have to kind of narrow it down as far as the actual games I showcase on these videos. But take it from me, if you just go onto any of the ROM hacking sites that have N64 hardware content, and they say that it works on real consoles, 99 out of 100 times that's going to be the case. I will show you the one ROM hack that I can run on MiSTer FPGA that I can't run on Analogue 3D at the end of the video, but of course we ended up being able to run Peach's Fury where I can't do that on N64 on MiSTer FPGA, so it really is just a push. But I'm sure if Robert wanted to make that work, it would only take probably a couple hours of coding just to pop that one last feature in that he decided to leave out at the last second. But again, Sands of Time here is just a ton of fun, and there are so many amazing Ocarina of Time ROM hacks out there for you to enjoy. Some of them honestly feel like straight up full-fledged sequels to some of the best games that N64 ever released, and it really does help expand the N64 library, because trust me, compared to PlayStation 1 and Sega Saturn, the N64 library is tiny. We're talking under 300 retail release games versus PlayStation 1 and Sega Saturn that number in the 4-digit category. So all the help N64 can get when it comes to new games, it's just something that absolutely makes a difference, because it gives you a lot more longevity to play games, and because you do have an Analogue 3D, I'm assuming if you're watching this video or you're thinking about getting one, it is fun to know that you're going to be able to play a lot more stuff out there that doesn't come on cartridge. You're just going to have an Everdrive to be able to load these, because at this point in time, you cannot load any games from the SD card in the back of the Analogue 3D. But if you ask me, I'm sure somewhere randomly a jailbreak will appear, maybe in the next month or two, that will allow you to actually load games up from the SD card like any other analog device out there. Now let's move over to a brand new ROM hack that basically doesn't exist as an N64 game, because it's its own thing and not even really a ROM hack whatsoever. This is Portal 64, and unfortunately it never got finished, just down to the fact that Valve stepped in and said to the developer they'd rather not actually have Portal being used here, because this game does use some Nintendo 64 libraries, and they were really worried about Nintendo suing, which is not at all an unfounded fear these days. Nintendo will sue you for so much as breathing the wrong way. If you don't buy their new games, they might just sue you for not buying them. All jokes aside, Nintendo was on a tear in 2025 suing everyone, so I understand Valve's hesitancy, and the developer on this one said they could basically convert it over to new libraries, but it would basically require a from the ground up recoding, and they just decided to move on to something else. But what is here in Portal 64 has always been outstanding, and I ran not one, not two, but 3 different previews on the MiSTer FPGA core, so I figured it was one of those games that I absolutely had to test here on Analogue 3D. And if I do another MiSTer FPGA versus Analogue 3D video, I'll definitely put these side by side, because I do think here in Analogue 3D, at least in the stock mode, it does seem to be running ever so slightly slower than I would see on MiSTer FPGA. But the thing is, on Analogue 3D, we don't really have a good way to get a frame counter on screen, so it could just be my imagination, it could be the game's logic, it could be any number of things, a dozen or so, that could actually affect some of that frame pacing, or it could just be me imagining everything in its entirety. But honestly, Portal 64 is a straight up 10 out of 10. If you have not yet played this game, you absolutely have to check it out. It's a masterclass in developing for the N64, and it's also a masterclass in down-converting a game that was available on PC, PlayStation 3, and Xbox 360, and making it work on very antiquated hardware compared to its source material. And it also has an incredible soundtrack and an incredible voiceover by GLaDOS, so go ahead and listen for 45 seconds, but come back because I still have more games to show you.
Hello, and again, welcome to the Aperture Science Computer-Aided Enrichment Center. We hope your brief detention in the relaxation vault has been a pleasant one. Your specimen has been processed, and we are now ready to begin the test proper. Before we start, however, keep in mind that although fun and learning are the primary goals of all Enrichment Center activities, serious injuries may occur. For your own safety and the safety of others, please refrain from
Por favor, por
donde fallan. Muchas gracias. And back.
You can't go wrong with the writing in a Valve game, especially Portal, but moving back over to the Nintendo 64 DD for just a moment, this is Dzamen 3D, or at least I believe I'm pronouncing that correctly. It is a game that has two different shmups on the cartridge, and also a full shmup builder. Kinda plays a little bit like the recently released Viewpoint 2064, but of course it is a conversion from the N64 DD over to a standard N64 Rom file. And it was one of those games I always enjoyed playing it. I always enjoyed testing it on new hardware and software emulation, so I figured it would be good here to test it on the Analogue 3D. And just like everything else I've shown in this video before, it was totally fine. I got to level 2 and basically decided if I got that far, we should be okay. But do be aware in these tests, I don't have some sort of time machine where I can spend 24 hours a day testing all of these games from start to finish to make sure you can see the credits scroll on each and every one of them. I confirm their booting, I play some of the game, I look for any visual glitches, any audio control glitches, and I basically say it is working, but you'll have to wait months upon months upon months for these small bugs and issues on the Analogue 3D to actually pop up. Because day one, the PAL version of Bomberman Hero would not boot whatsoever, and Analogue had to release new firmware to fix that. Now if there's a bug in one of these ROM hacks, do I expect Analogue to go in and fix it to make sure you can play it? I do not, because there's honestly thousands upon thousands of ROM hacks out there. It would require a full-time team of dozens of people, a few years, just to be able to go through all of the different ROM hacks out there, trying to figure out why one game didn't work. But as far as this one, it is 100% working, and you can basically again go through whatever DD games you want and give them a try, but trust me, you're not going to find all that many quote-unquote video games in there. All of those Mario Paint Studios and otherwise, they are a fun thing to experience, but there really isn't any video game as far as the video game is concerned. Let's take a look at Mario's Modules, a game I also just recently featured on MiSTer FPGA, and it's absolutely an awesome time. Basically how this works is when you start out, Mario has no abilities whatsoever. He's only able to move around in the 3D space. Every single kick, punch, and otherwise moveset that you can do in a standard Super Mario 64 game is going to be available here, but you just have to find the parts to be able to string it together in the Modules menu. It is probably the most creative ROM hack I've seen in 2025. I've been playing this a ton just in my spare time, and I absolutely recommend it to everyone. And this was one that I definitely wanted to test on Analogue 3D because I've been having so much fun with it. It would be a bummer if it didn't work on the 3D side of things. But clearly you can tell as I play it here, everything seems to be working totally fine. And the big hook on this one is you get these modules and you can string them together on either the A button or the B button, depending on what their function is within the game. And you basically create an entire moveset with Mario and try to solve quasi-puzzles in platforming based upon all the modules you have. But this one again is one of those games runs a tiny bit slow on real hardware compared to actual software emulation, and overclocking this one really didn't seem to get any better results. It's just one of those things. Some things are more made for emulators that will force the issue harder than Analogue 3D or the MiSTer FPGA Turbo Core will force it. Let's do one more soundtrack sample in the video because this game has some really fun music that is completely unlike the Super Mario 64 tunes you're used to. I'll come back because I have one game to show you that I just could not get to play on the Analogue 3D. Mario's modules is a total vibe, especially in the soundtrack department. Now, I mentioned Diddy Kong Racing and the performance patch briefly in the Analogue 3D versus MiSTer FPGA video, and I did some more testing in the background. Now, this performance patch definitely is notorious for crashing every once in a while. Even the maker says that you can't really run it 100% of the time 100% perfectly. They really haven't revisited it yet, and that's not a strike against the maker, it is just a pending thing. But I will say I've crashed this thing maybe 1 out of every 10 times I try it on MiSTer FPGA, or here in Analogue 3D I crash it 10 out of 10 times. Why that is, I do not know. It's just one of those aberrations in testing where I can't explain it. I can just show it to you and you can kind of observe it yourself. It is a bit of a bummer. Of course, the standard Diddy Kong Racing cartridge or the file on an Everdrive or other thing like a summer cart will work fine. But when I go into any of the modes here on Diddy Kong Racing with a performance patch, I just end up in a situation where I'm able to select the mode, and then whether it's Adventure, Adventure 2, or the actual tracks, everything is just going to go to black from here and it will never recover. You just basically have to reset the flash cart. But that's the current situation with ROM hacks and fan games on the N64 and Analogue 3D. Peach's Fury is one that works on Analogue 3D that doesn't on MiSTer FPGA, but we know why and it could work. And Diddy Kong Racing is one that doesn't work on Analogue 3D that will work on MiSTer FPGA. Don't be surprised if you pick a random ROM hack and find out that it doesn't work. I cannot test every game out there, I'd have to be magic. But that's the result, and I'll upload this video without the voiceover as well so you can just hear the tests. But I'll see you guys next time. Bye bye.